Ever feel like you're just drowning in information? Always searching for that one thing, that core truth that just simplifies everything.
Yeah, it's a common feeling, isn't it? Information overload.
Totally. Well, today we're actually taking a fascinating journey into a really unique source. It's a classic text called the Madhurya Kadambini.
By Visvanatha Cakravarti Thakura. A real gem.
Right. You can think of it as sort of an ancient guide to, well, the ultimate human pursuit, maybe.
That's a good way to put it.
So our mission today is to really unpack a foundational concept from this incredible work, bhakti. You often hear it translated as devotional service. We're going to explore what it is, why it's considered, distinct from other paths, and how it can profoundly shift your whole perception of reality.
It really can.
So get ready for some insights that might just give you a few aha moments.
What's really remarkable here, I think, is how this text, written centuries ago, offers such a precise and clear understanding of spiritual life.
Yeah.
It cuts through so many common misconceptions.
Right.
It presents this really coherent system that aims to free us from that constant struggle, that feeling of being overwhelmed you mentioned. Just what our listener, like many of us, wants to avoid.
Okay, so let's dive in. Let's unpack this core idea. What is devotional service, bhakti, and who exactly is the focus of this devotion?
Good starting point.
Our source, and it draws heavily from the Srimad Bhagavatam here.
A foundational text.
Absolutely. It defines bhakti as unmotivated and uninterrupted loving devotional service to the transcendental Lord. And it uses these two key Sanskrit terms, a hetuki for unmotivated.
Causeless, yeah.
And apratihata for uninterrupted or independent. Could you maybe elaborate a bit? Why are those two characteristics so crucial for understanding bhakti?
Absolutely. Those terms are central, really, hetuki. It means it arises purely from, let's say, divine grace. It's not prompted by any material cause, not by personal effort, not by wanting something in return.
Okay, so not cause and effect in the usual sense?
Exactly. And apratihata means it just can't be stopped. Not by anything external, not even internal struggles. It's unstoppable.
Oh, wow.
Now, you asked about the focus. Who is this transcendental Lord? Well, another ancient text, the Taittiriya Upanishad, it explains the Lord as rasa.
Rasa, meaning?
Meaning he's the very essence of nectar, or pleasure itself. And the text gives this brilliant example. Think of Krishna in that wrestling arena.
Right, I remember reading about that.
So to the wrestlers, he looked like a lightning bolt, fearsome. But ordinary men saw him as, the best-looking guy around. Women saw Cupid incarnate.
Different perspectives.
Totally different. His parents saw their child. King Kamsa, his enemy, saw death itself. Yogis perceived the absolute truth. And his own devotees, the Vrishnas, they saw their supreme worshipable deity.
So the same person seen entirely differently.
Exactly. And the point the text makes is that the Lord appears by his own independent will. It's not because of some material cause, and it's not dependent on how we perceive him.
Okay, that's a key distinction, his own agency.
Right. And similarly, his devotional service, bhakti, it shares that self-manifesting nature. It's also not dependent on any material cause for its appearance. It just is.
Okay, that makes sense. Bhakti reflecting the Lord's independence. So here's where it gets really interesting for a lot of people, I think. How does bhakti stack up against other paths? Meditation, yoga, charity, all those things. Is it just one option among many?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Feels like it. And our source is pretty emphatic. It states that bhakti isn't just superior, but it's completely independent of other practices like karma, pious activities.
Right, good deeds.
Jnana, that's speculative knowledge, yoga, the mystic system, charity, vows, penances. All of it.
It sets bhakti apart.
Completely. And the analogy it uses is, well, it's powerful. It says, without devotion to the Lord, good birth, scriptural knowledge, charity, vows, penances, etc., are like decorating a dead body.
Whoa. Blunt. It really is. It basically says these other things are fruitless without bhakti. So what's the core insight here? Why this absolute stance? Well, the core insight is this. While things like karma, jnana, and yoga can lead to certain results, their ultimate accomplishment, their real success, actually depends on bhakti.
Ah, okay. So they need bhakti to work fully.
In essence, yes.
Right.
But bhakti itself, it's never dependent on them. Not for its appearance, not for its results. It's like a one-way street of dependency.
Gotcha. Bhakti doesn't need them, but they need bhakti.
Exactly. And this also sheds light on that idea of good fortune, or sukti. People often think, oh, I did good deeds, so I'll do devotion.
Right. Sounds logical.
But the text clarifies this. It says the real sukriti that leads to devotion doesn't come from just material pious acts. It's actually understood as the attainment of the mercy of the devotee.
Mercy of the devotee. So it's transmitted, in a way.
It emphasizes bhakti's purely spiritual origin. It's not something you just earn materially. Now, this ties into another common question people have about fairness, divine fairness.
Like, if God's mercy is causeless, why isn't it everywhere equally?
Precisely. The text says the Lord's mercy is causeless, but it's not bestowed equally everywhere. And this isn't seen as a fault in the Lord, not partiality in a negative sense.
How so?
It's described as an ornament, something that actually enhances his nature. It's this special, affectionate obligation the Lord feels towards his devotees. It even has a name, Bhakti Trilogy.
The Lord being obliged to his devotees.
In a loving way, yes. And ultimately, the Lord's mercy is said to follow after the mercy of his devotee. Why? Because bhakti itself resides within the devotee's heart.
Ah, okay. So bhakti in the devotee prompts their mercy.
Which then inspires bhakti in others and attracts the Lord's mercy. It all comes back to bhakti's self-manifesting, causeless, independent nature. It's a complete circle originating from bhakti itself.
That's quite a profound concept, bhakti being the source and the sustainer. Okay, so if bhakti is supreme, independent, the whole deal, how does one actually practice it? Practically speaking, what does the journey look like? What are the bumps in the road?
Right, the practical side.
Our source uses this really beautiful analogy for pure bhakti, bhakti that's not mixed up with wanting results from karma or jnana. It calls it a wish-fulfilling creeper.
A lovely image.
It really is. And it says its very presence makes the heart and senses gradually lose their iron-like material qualities and acquire pure golden spiritual qualities like alchemy.
A transformation, yeah.
And this creeper has 2 leaves. Can you explain what those leaves represent?
Sure. The first leaf is called dukkani. That means relief from material distresses.
Like what kinds of distress?
Things like ignorance, false ego, attachment, hatred, and that burning suffering that comes from lust. Basically, it alleviates the pain of material existence.
Okay, so suffering reduction. What's the second leaf?
The second is shubhada. This signifies the beginning of all auspiciousness.
Auspiciousness, meaning good things start happening.
In a spiritual sense, yes.
Yeah.
It means developing qualities like natural disinterest in purely material affairs, and crucially, a growing interest in serving the Lord.
So less suffering, more spiritual inclination. And where does this journey start?
It starts with shraddha, faith. The text mentions 2 kinds. One is natural faith, sort of inherent, and the other is conviction that comes from hearing, from preaching, from authentic sources.
Faith is the seed. And then?
Then comes bhajana kriya, the actual practice of devotion. But the text points out there's usually an initial unsteady period. It's called aniyatita.
Unsteady. Sounds familiar for any new pursuit.
Exactly. And it outlines several common ways this unsteadiness shows up, these wavering efforts.
Like what? Can you give us some examples?
Sure. One is called utsahamaya. It's like this burst of false confidence, like a new student who studies for an hour and thinks they've mastered everything.
Yeah, I know that feeling.
Then there's gadatara, that sporadic effort, super diligent one day, totally negligent the next, ups and downs.
Okay.
Another one is vyayasagara. This is a big one for many, really struggling with those persistent material desires, even while trying to be devoted.
The old habits die hard.
They do. These challenges, the text calls them weeds, growing around that main creeper of bhakti.
Weeds. Okay, so things that choke the main plant, if you're not careful. What exactly are these weeds, these anarthas, unwanted things that crop up?
Right, anarthas. The text breaks them down into 4 main types. Some come from our past, things like ignorance, false ego.
Okay, baggage from the past.
Then, interestingly, some come from past pious acts.
How can good deeds cause problems?
If they lead to attachment to material enjoyments, like enjoying the fruits of your good karma too much. Then there are anarthas from offenses, especially spiritual ones. And finally, some can even arise from bhakti itself, if your motive gets mixed.
Mixed motives, like wanting fame or money from being spiritual.
Exactly. Seeking material gain, wealth, followers, that kind of thing, instead of pure devotion. That's a subtle but dangerous weed.
And you mentioned spiritual offenses. What's the most critical one?
The text highlights namapartha, offenses against the holy name of the Lord. And the first, the most serious, is listed as criticism of the Vaishnava, criticizing a sincere devotee.
Why is that so serious?
It ties back to what we discussed about the Lord's affection for his devotees. Criticizing them is seen as deeply offensive to the Lord himself. People might ask, isn't the Lord partial? He punishes demons but protects devotees.
Yeah, that question comes up.
But again, the text frames this partiality not as a fault, but as that ornament enhancing his loving nature. It reflects his bond with those devoted to him.
Okay, so it's about understanding that divine affection, not applying purely human logic of fairness. What about intentional sin? Like thinking, oh, I can just chant and then do whatever I want. The name will fix it.
That's a really important caution the text gives. It strongly warns against that mindset. If someone intentionally commits sin, thinking, oh, the holy name is my safety net, that's considered a very dangerous offense, Namaprada. It actually hinders spiritual progress significantly.
So no gaming the system.
Definitely not. However, despite these serious cautions, the text also powerfully emphasizes the incredible, unparalleled power of the holy name itself, Nama.
Okay, so there's potency there, regardless.
Immense potency. Chanting the Lord's name, it says, has no restrictions concerning place, time, purity, and so on. It's completely independent of all those external conditions.
No rules.
Basically, none for the name itself. Texts like the Skanda Purana state that the name of Krishna chanted even once, either with faith or without faith, can deliver any person.
Even without faith.
Even without faith, or even chanted improperly. It says it doesn't depend on the purity of practice and will deliver the fallen soul. The classic example always cited is Ajamila.
Right, the story you mentioned, he wasn't chanting with devotion initially.
Not at all. He was a great sinner, apparently. But on his deathbed, seeing the frightening messengers of death, he called out in fear of just calling his son. But because he uttered the Lord's name, even inadvertently, he was saved from the Yamadutas, the agents of death's judge. And the text notes, though his chanting was not pure in intention, he's still universally praised as a devotee because the name itself had such power.
That's incredible, the power of the name itself.
Absolutely. And the text reassures us, through the holy name, lust and other impurities are certainly destroyed. The very presence of bhakti, especially through chanting the name, naturally purifies the heart.
That's a really powerful assurance, especially with that Ajamila story. Okay, so bringing it all together, what does this mean for our inner journey? How does bhakti truly change a person deep down? What's the ultimate payoff? You mentioned the heart turning from iron to gold. What does that transformation feel like, look like?
It's described as a profound internal shift. Bhakti, by its very nature, clears away those obstacles, those anarthas, even really deep-rooted things like lust. If they crop up in a devotee's heart, the text says they are destroyed simply by the consistent practice of bhakti itself.
Just by practicing?
Just by the practice. There are references to Krishna's intimate pastimes and statements by Uddhava and the Bhagavatam supporting this, and the Bhagavad Gita makes that really striking statement. Even if a person engaged in devotional service commits the most abominable act, he's still considered saintly.
That's a controversial one sometimes.
It is, but the point isn't to excuse bad acts. It's to emphasize the overwhelming transformative power of sincere devotion. That connection to the divine is so strong, it inevitably pulls the person away from such behavior. It recenters them.
So the devotion itself is the purifying agent.
Exactly. And achieving this state, this genuine devotion, is presented as incredibly rare. The Srimad Bhagavatam says, even among many millions of liberated and perfected souls, a devotee of the Lord Narayana is extremely rare.
Millions of liberated souls, and a devotee is still rare.
That's what it says. It really underscores bhakti not just as a path, but as the ultimate, most precious attainment.
Wow. Okay, so connecting this back to the bigger picture, it really sounds like the argument is all other spiritual paths, karma, jnana, yoga, they find their fulfillment through bhakti. They depend on it. But bhakti stands alone, completely independent.
That's the core message, yes.
Does the text offer any perspective on things people often associate with spirituality, like, say, renunciation, giving things up?
It does, and it's quite nuanced, maybe even surprising to some. The text actually suggests that forced or premature renunciation can be a fault in the culture of bhakti.
A fault. Usually it's seen as a virtue.
Right, but the text quotes the Lord himself giving a stark warning about it. He tells Uddhava essentially, if someone gives up family life before they're truly ready, while still attached internally, they'll just keep thinking about it. And if they die in that state of inner conflict, attached but outwardly renounced, they risk going to a very dark place.
So forcing it outwardly when you're not ready inwardly is bad.
Very much so. This is contrasted with natural renunciation. If detachment from material things arises spontaneously because of bhakti, because your attraction to the Lord has become so strong that other things just fall away.
Ah, it's an effect, not a cause.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Then it's seen as a beautiful effect of bhakti, a symptom of progress. The example given is Prahlada Maharaja, that famous child devotee. He naturally gave up all material attachments even as a boy, simply because of his intense love and attraction for the Lord. It wasn't forced. It was the natural result of his bhakti.
So the internal change has to come first, and the external follows naturally. That makes sense. What about understanding divinity itself, like all the different forms, demigods, the supreme?
Yeah, that's another crucial clarification the text provides. It explains there are fundamentally two types of conscious beings, or chaitanya. There's the independent consciousness, that's the Supreme Lord, Ishvara, and then there's the dependent consciousness, that's all of us, individual souls, jivas.
Okay, independent Lord, dependent souls.
Right. And based on this, it's considered an offense shastraninda, offense against Scripture, to think that the Supreme Lord, Vishnu or Narayana, is on the same level as other powerful beings like the demigods Shiva or Brahma.
Even though they are very powerful.
Immensely powerful, yes. But the understanding is that they are empowered jivas, empowered souls acting under the Lord's direction. They derive their power from the Lord.
So seeing them as equal to the source of their power is the mistake.
Precisely. However, there's a nuance. The text also says that if someone truly realizes the Lord's supreme power, they understand how figures like Brahma and Shiva function as the Lord's agents. It uses an analogy, like sunlight being focused and distributed through a magnifying jewel, the Suryakanta jewel.
So they channel the Lord's power.
Right. So in their function, they are non-different because they carry out the Lord's will, but their origin is distinct. They are not the source. They are conduits empowered by the source.
Okay, that clarifies the relationship. Non-different in function, but different in ultimate identity.
Exactly. And ultimately, the text brings it all back to bhakti's power to overcome everything, even ignorance. It says even an ignorant person can very easily come to know the Supreme Lord if they adopt the means spoken by the Supreme Lord himself, which is Bhagavat Bhakti, devotional service.
So bhakti is the key, even if you start from a place of not knowing much.
Yes. And it has this wonderful line illustrating bhakti's protective nature. Even if a devotee intentionally closes his eyes and runs, still he will never stumble or fall.
Meaning bhakti protects you even from your own mistakes.
The unintentional ones, yes. It guides and protects you. And maybe the most powerful concluding thought comes from a great commentator, Sri Sridhar Swami, who basically said, only a non-human would refuse to serve the Lord.
Implying it's the most natural thing for the soul.
Exactly, the inherent constitutional position.
Wow. Okay. What a deep dive today. We've really explored the essence of bhakti as presented in the Madhurya Kadambini, how it's not just a path, but framed as the very life giver to all other spiritual efforts. Completely independent, self-sufficient.
The core argument.
We talked about how this devotion can literally transform our inner nature, that iron to gold idea, and how it has the power to clear away even those really stubborn weeds, material desires, past karma, offenses.
Yeah, its purifying potency is central.
It really is.
This brings up a really interesting, maybe final thought to consider. If bhakti is presented as truly so causeless, so powerful, so independent and liberating, why do you think so many people seem to overlook it or maybe complicate what's described as this most direct and beautiful path?
That's a great question. Maybe it seems too simple, or maybe it requires a kind of surrender that feels difficult.
Could be. Perhaps the real test isn't just grasping it intellectually, understand the concepts we discuss. Maybe the real challenge is whether we allow this profound truth to genuinely touch us, to actually transform our own lives.
Something to really chew on, for sure. Is it head knowledge or heart transformation?
Right. Where does it land for you personally?
Definitely something to ponder. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive today. It's been fascinating.
My pleasure. Always good to explore these texts.
Absolutely. And to everyone listening, until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep an open mind.